There's a lot of people that I think would show up that I don't want there.
Right.
Like, I don't want them there because the reasons for showing up aren't necessarily the best reason.
For those who loved Charmed, it was a painful reminder of the fractures behind the magic. For Shannen, it was the only way to ensure her goodbye stayed true to who she was. Honest, raw, and unafraid to speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Before Charmed, before the endless tabloid stories of feuds and firings, Shannen Doherty was America's ultimate teen star. As Brenda Walsh on Beverly Hills, 90210, she was fiery, independent, and rebellious, a character who mirrored many of Shannon's own traits. For millions of fans, Brenda was the heart of the show. But behind the cameras, the drama was just as intense as the scripted storylines. Shannen joined the cast in 1990, a group of young actors suddenly thrust into overnight stardom. Among them was Tori Spelling, the daughter of legendary TV producer Aaron Spelling, who created the series. At first, Shannen and Tori were friendly, bonded by the surreal experience of sudden fame. But as the show grew into a cultural phenomenon, cracks began to appear. Shannon's work ethic and fiery personality sometimes clashed with her co-stars, and the press quickly labeled her difficult. Rumors circulated of lateness to set, heated arguments, and icy relationships with fellow cast members like Jenny Garth. But the most complicated relationship of all was with Tori Spelling. According to insiders, Tori and Shannon's friendship soured as tension on set escalated. Some claimed Shannen felt Tori received preferential treatment because of her father's power, while others suggested jealousy and competition played a role. Whatever the truth, their once friendly bond eventually fractured into mistrust. The breaking point came in 1994, when Shannen was abruptly written out of 90210. Officially, it was presented as a mutual decision. Unofficially, whispers told another story, that Aaron Spelling, under pressure from the cast and crew, decided Shannen was too much trouble. Years later, Tori admitted publicly that she had gone to her father and asked for Shannen to be fired. The revelation stunned fans. For Shannen, it confirmed what she had long suspected, that people she once considered friends had betrayed her when she needed them most. The fallout was brutal. Shannen lost her role on the show that made her a household name, and her reputation as Hollywood's bad girl hardened. In the tabloids, she became the scapegoat, while Tori remained the producer's daughter, protected and secure. Though the two women occasionally spoke in later years, the fracture never truly healed. When Shannen reflected on her life decades later, Tori's name reportedly surfaced on the list of people she didn't want at her funeral. To Shannen, it wasn't about holding a grudge for the sake of bitterness. It was about protecting her peace. She didn't want her final farewell to become a stage for people who had once cut her down. A funeral, she reportedly said in one podcast, shouldn't be a photo op. For Shannen, Tori Spelling's presence would represent hypocrisy, a reminder of betrayal disguised as friendship. And then there was Aaron Spelling. While Shannen never denied that she owed much of her career to him, their relationship was complicated. Aaron was one of the most powerful men in television, the architect not just of 90210, but of an entire era of primetime drama. Yet it was his authority that ultimately sealed Shannon's fate on the show. For her, Aaron symbolized the machinery of Hollywood, a world where decisions weren't made based on loyalty or truth, but on convenience and control. Even after his passing in 2006, Shannen remained conflicted about Aaron's legacy in her life. She respected his talent, but resented the way she had been treated under his watch. When speaking about her funeral wishes, it wasn't about Aaron himself, but about the system he represented, one that had elevated her and torn her down in equal measure. By tying both Tori and Aaron Spelling to her final confession, Shannen made a statement that cut to the core of her Hollywood journey. For her, life wasn't about pretending wounds never happened. It was about acknowledging them, even at the very end. She didn't want false mourners or hollow tributes. She wanted honesty, even if it meant excluding some of the most powerful names connected to her rise. And just like that, Shannen Doherty reminded the world of who she had always been, a woman unafraid to confront the truth, even when it made others uncomfortable. By the time Shannen Doherty reached her 50s, she had lived more lifetimes than most. She had been a child star on Little House on the Prairie, a teen icon on Beverly Hills 90210, a witchy fan favorite on Charmed, and later, a survivor who let the world in on her battle with breast cancer. Through it all, one thing remained constant. Shannen never pretended to be anything she wasn't. Her health struggles, which began in 2015 with her cancer diagnosis, gave her a new perspective on life and death. Shannen became deeply introspective, often speaking candidly in interviews and podcasts about her fears, regrets, and hopes. Unlike many celebrities who curate a glossy, untouchable image, Shannen refused to sugarcoat reality. She let the world see her vulnerability, her anger, her resilience. As the disease progressed, she spoke more openly about her own mortality. She didn't shy away from the topic of death, but instead approached it with the same unflinching honesty she had shown throughout her career. She admitted she wasn't afraid of dying, but she was afraid of leaving her loved ones behind. And just as importantly, she was determined that her passing, and the events surrounding it, would reflect her truth. That's why her final confession about her funeral struck such a chord. By naming certain people she did not want there, Shannen was making more than a personal request. She was making a statement about authenticity. To her, a funeral should not be a place where enemies gather for appearances, nor where strained relationships are glossed over with empty platitudes. Instead, it should be an intimate space for those who truly loved her, stood by her, and accepted her without conditions. Fans were shocked at first by the bluntness of her wish. How many celebrities, after all, would dare say out loud that they didn't want certain famous names at their funeral? But those who knew Shannen's story understood. This was not about bitterness, it was about boundaries. In life, she had been misunderstood, mislabeled, and at times vilified. In death, she wasn't about to let others rewrite her narrative. Her closest friends, like fellow actresses Sarah Michelle Gellar and Holly Marie Combs, praised her courage. They explained that Shannen's honesty was not cruelty, but clarity. She didn't want fake tears or headline-grabbing appearances at her memorial. She wanted peace, love, and truth, the very things she had fought for in her personal life and career. For her fans, this revelation made them love her even more. In a world where Hollywood often runs on fakery, Shannen chose authenticity until the very end. She reminded people that it's okay to set boundaries, even in something as final as death. Her confession sparked countless online discussions about honesty, forgiveness, and the importance of surrounding yourself with those who genuinely care. In the end, Shannen Doherty's legacy was not defined by her feuds or the roles she lost, but by the strength of her convictions. She had been brave enough to call out injustice, bold enough to admit her vulnerabilities, and fierce enough to protect her peace in both life and death. When fans look back on her life, they don't just remember Brenda Walsh or Prue Halliwell. They remember a woman who fought cancer with grace, who stood up for herself when others tried to silence her, and who reminded the world that it's better to be hated for telling the truth than loved for living a lie. And perhaps that's the greatest tribute of all. Shannen Doherty left this world on her own terms, and in doing so, she left behind a legacy of strength, resilience, and raw, unapologetic honesty. As Shannen Doherty faced the final chapter of her life, she surprised fans with one last revelation. It wasn't about her career, her regrets, or even her legacy. It was about her funeral. In a startlingly honest confession, Doherty revealed there were people she did not want to see there. Names tied to some of the biggest shows of the 1990s, names that once shared the screen with her, and names that shaped, and sometimes destroyed, her Hollywood story. Today, we uncover the truth behind her final wish, the feuds that never healed, and the legacy she left behind as one of television's most complicated stars. Shannen Doherty was never afraid of the truth. Throughout her decades in Hollywood, the actress became just as famous for her fiery personality as for her iconic roles. From Beverly Hills, 90210 to Charmed, she carved out a place in television history as a strong, magnetic presence. But behind that charisma was a woman who refused to compromise, not for co-stars, not for producers, and not for the image Hollywood wanted her to maintain. Her reputation as difficult followed her from the earliest years of her career. On 90210, the gossip columns painted her as a diva. On Charmed, she was described as combative and hard to work with. Yet those closest to her often painted a different picture, a perfectionist who demanded authenticity, someone who couldn't tolerate fakery or dishonesty. For Shannen, the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, was always more important than keeping the peace. That same quality defined her later years, especially when she faced the most difficult battle of all. In 2015, Shannen revealed she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. The news shocked fans, but what truly stood out was the way she chose to handle it. Rather than hiding her illness, she opened up publicly, sharing her treatments, her fears, and her fight with a raw honesty rarely seen in Hollywood. She became a voice for resilience, showing the world that even in moments of vulnerability, she remained unflinchingly real. By 2020, her cancer had returned at stage 4, and once again, she refused to hide. She spoke openly about her mortality, about what it meant to live with limited time, and about her desire to control her narrative. "I don't want people to write my story for me," she once said. "I want to write it myself." That sentiment extended beyond her interviews and her podcast. As her health declined, Shannen began to reflect on her legacy, not just what she wanted people to remember, but also what she didn't want them to pretend. And that's where her most surprising confession emerged. She admitted there were people she didn't want at her funeral. To some, it sounded shocking. Funerals are supposed to be about closure, about setting aside the past in the face of loss. But for Shannen, who had spent her life refusing to sugarcoat reality, the idea of allowing people she distrusted or disliked to stand at her graveside felt hypocritical. She didn't want her final farewell to be turned into a Hollywood spectacle of false tears. The names she hinted at were not random. They came from decades of conflict, betrayal, and power struggles. People who, in her eyes, had hurt her too deeply to deserve a place at her final goodbye. These weren't minor disagreements either. They were long-standing feuds with co-stars, clashes with producers, and broken bonds that were never repaired. In true Shannen fashion, she didn't phrase it delicately. She never did. Just as she had lived, bold, blunt, and unafraid, she wanted her death to reflect the same. If her funeral was going to be a moment of honesty, she wanted it free from the presence of people who had shown her nothing but duplicity in life. For fans, this confession was both heartbreaking and revealing. It painted a portrait of a woman who valued authenticity above all else. Even as she faced the end, Shannen Doherty was unwilling to pretend, unwilling to let those who hurt her share in a farewell they hadn't earned. And as the world braced itself to learn who those names were, it became clear this was not just about death. It was about the final statement of a woman who had spent her entire life fighting for the truth. When Charmed premiered in 1998, it seemed destined to be a hit. The series brought together 3 powerful female leads, Shannen Doherty, Holly Marie Combs, and Alyssa Milano, playing the Hallowell sisters, witches bound by both magic and family ties. On screen, the chemistry was undeniable, and fans flocked to the show. But off-screen, tensions simmered almost immediately, and at the heart of those tensions was the growing clash between Shannen and Alyssa. From the beginning, Shannen brought intensity to her role as Prue Hallowell. She took the work seriously, often pushing for deeper scripts and stronger storytelling. Alyssa, meanwhile, leaned into her role as Phoebe with a lighter, more carefree energy. At first, the differences in their acting styles seemed complementary. But as the seasons went on, the differences became divides. Rumors of behind-the-scenes feuds began circulating by season 2. Crew members whispered about icy stares, long silences, and arguments over everything from camera time to contracts. Shannen, who already carried the tabloid reputation of being difficult from her 90210 days, was painted as the instigator. But according to Shannen and her closest ally on set, Holly Marie Combs, the story wasn't so simple. In interviews years later, Shannen admitted that her relationship with Alyssa was strained to the breaking point. She claimed Alyssa isolated herself from the other 2 leads, creating a divide on set. Holly echoed the sentiment, saying she and Shannen often felt like outsiders in their own show. There was a lot of drama, Holly once admitted. And it wasn't coming from Shannen the way the press said it was. The tension finally exploded in 2001, when Shannen abruptly left Charmed after season 3. Officially, the departure was explained as a creative decision. Prue was killed off in a dramatic showdown, and Rose McGowan was brought in as her replacement. Unofficially, Hollywood insiders knew the truth. The feud between Shannen and Alyssa had made the set unbearable, and producers sided with Alyssa. For Shannen, the betrayal cut deep. Not only had she lost a role in a hit series, but she also felt she had been painted unfairly as the villain while Alyssa walked away as the hero. In later years, she admitted that while time softened her anger, she never truly forgave Alyssa for the way things played out. The wound wasn't just professional, it was personal. That's why, in her final years, when asked about her funeral wishes, Alyssa Milano's name reportedly surfaced on the list of people she didn't want present. For Shannen, a funeral wasn't about appearances or reconciliation. It wasn't about giving rivals one last chance to be photographed with tears in their eyes. It was about truth. And the truth was, she didn't want Alyssa anywhere near her final farewell. Fans weren't surprised. For decades, the Shannen versus Alyssa feud had been one of Hollywood's most talked-about rivalries. Even though both actresses occasionally downplayed the animosity in interviews, their words never erased the history. The tension was woven into the DNA of Charmed, as much a part of its legacy as the spells and demons the sisters fought on screen. Shannen's confession added a final chapter to that story. It wasn't vindictive, and it wasn't dramatic for the sake of headlines. It was simply consistent with the way she had lived her life, refusing to fake closeness where none existed. She had no interest in false displays of grief or people showing up out of obligation. Her funeral, she believed, should be free of politics and pretense, and that meant Alyssa Milano was not welcome.